Everyone, and thank you for joining us for a series of dynamic national conversations on creative youth development. I'm Sofia Fojas, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by an incredible group of speakers who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. We also thank you for coming together in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic and this unprecedented time of instability and so the CYD Toolkit Series is designed to amplify key themes in a set of written briefs authored by field experts. Each webinar will engage in a diverse community of stakeholders, youth, experts, funders, and practitioners to explore new paths forward for creative youth development practice. During today's webinar on the creative youth development, advocacy, and policy, we will discuss key insights and recommendations presented in Ed Spitzberg's recently released paper, and we'll hear perspectives from representatives at RYSE and Afterschool Alliance. This virtual learning series is brought to you by the Creative Youth Development National Partnership. It is hosted by the National Guild for Community Arts Education and made possible by generous support from the Clare Rose Foundation. The written briefs on which each webinar is based are part of the first phase of a CYD toolkit for the field, a multi-year CYD National Partnership project led by the Americans for the Arts. This webinar is scheduled to last 60 minutes. Again, your audio and video have been disabled for this webinar. If you'd like to ask a question or share an idea, we encourage you to do so. Simply type it into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring these questions throughout the presentation and will open up with a discussion during the last half hour. Thank you again for being here. And now if the panelists could introduce themselves.
Sure, I'll start. Thank you, Sophia, and thank all the attendees for coming and the Guild and all the sponsors. I'm Ed Spitzberg. I wrote the paper, conducted a literature review. That's the spark for this a couple of years ago. And I have been an executive director of a creative youth development organization here in DC, Sitar Arts Center. I have been a fundraiser for both youth development organizations and arts organizations for Arena Stage and Afterschool Alliance. And I am, for the past few years, I've been a strategic consultant and facilitator with my own firm, Spitzberg Advisors.
And I am the new coordinator for arts for the Santa Clara County Office of Education in San Jose, California. Tara?
Hi, my name is Tara Malik. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Media Arts and Culture Director at the RYSE Center in Richmond, California. I'll kick it over to Gio.
Dope. My name is Gio. I use he, him, his. I'm from the RYSE Youth Center in Richmond, California, and I'm a youth organizer. I'll kick it over to Isaiah.
Hello, my name is Isaiah Grant. I am a RYSE Fellow and videographer here at the RYSE Center. And, ooh, I'm messing up my words. And I'm coming from Richmond, California. If I'm forgetting anything. I kick it off to Erik.
Thanks, Isaiah. Erik Peterson. I work for the Afterschool Alliance, doing policy and advocacy work based here in Washington, D.C. And really excited to be invited to be part of this today, and looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you. And now if we could move over to Ed, can you speak to your paper, please?
Sure, thank you, Sophia. So I put a couple of quotes to start, this one first, and just to get us in the right mindset for pursuing advocacy. One thing I found in looking at the advocacy literature is that it's definitely as much of an art as it is a science. That does not mean to, I don't mean to dismiss the science part of it. It's very important to plan. It's very important to think strategically, which I'll get to in the next quote. But it's important to layer variety of strategies and be flexible. Looking at the next slide. So what this quote I think is getting at here is that strategies are important, but not any one specific strategy. You have to think about your capacity as an organization, your capacity as an advocacy network, more beyond just one organization, and looking at a variety of tactics, strategies, approaches, layers, targets for advocacy, because what you never know how things are going to change. And this today, this week, this month, this year is a prime example of that. That idea cannot be more timely. And so what I found in reviewing best practices around advocacy and policies are 5 key trends. The first 2 trends here are essentially strategies to think about, and the latter three are tactics, things to frame your tactics. As I was alluding to with the quotes, one thing that came throughout in a variety of different fields, organizations, and networks is that it's really important to have a multi-pronged, flexible advocacy strategy. As I was saying before, that means it's not just grassroots, it's not just grass tops, it's not just letter writing, it's not just meeting with policymakers, it's not just organizing, it's not just protesting, it's all of the above. And that's the multi-pronged part, but being flexible is incredibly important as well, because you never know what's going to change, you never know what's going to have success. If you have a success in a particular area, you need to pursue that and leverage that. If you're not hitting success in a particular strategy, you should be flexible and change it to something that might, while at the same time trying to hit as many have as many prongs as possible. And again, this couldn't be more true than today in the environment we're in. The second overall strategy is keeping equity at the center. And actually, if you look at the paper, I got that many of the ideas that are in it are from the organization called Equity at the Center. And what became clear is that many advocacy campaigns, many organizations, many networks were and are initially seeing how important equity is in an advocacy campaign for a variety of intrinsic and extrinsic reasons. However, what seemed to be the case is that many advocacy campaigns made an initial effort and had intentions to be equity focused throughout. And then when the rubber hit the road, when it became difficult, equity was not indeed at the center throughout. And so it's important to keep a variety of strategies to not just make it something that's a goal at the beginning, but to make sure at every step of planning an advocacy campaign that equity is front and center. And the paper discusses a variety of ways to do so. For time's sake, I'll refer you just to that for now, other than to point out the fact that it's not sufficient just to plan that at the beginning. It needs to be interwoven throughout any advocacy campaign. And that actually, if a quick tangent is to, that's one of the challenges with advocacy writ large, is that it is any organization's individual capacity and resources. Because by nature, advocacy and policy is a field-wide effort, whatever the field might be and however you carve it, it's hard for any one organization to lead or to break through on an advocacy center just because of time availability, and equity is an example of things that is of an important goal that often does not stay front and center as it should. The 3 tactics at the bottom, I'll actually start from the bottom. Network development. Defining what the network is important. I'm going to talk about that in the Goldilocks framing in a second, but defining the network not only helps shape the advocacy campaign or the advocacy strategy, but it's also important in how various parts of the network can relate to each other. The more cohesive the network, the more the network knows each other, knows the players, knows the challenges that each part of the network is facing, the stronger it will ultimately be. So developing the network, not just defining it, but developing it and convening the network, finding ways to share information is very important. That does lead to the, back up to the Goldilocks framing. If you define a network too broadly, the message will get muddled because it'll be too wide, it'll be hard to focus on what it is you're advocating for. If you define it too narrowly, you might leave out some advocates, either on the advocates or people who are receiving the message on the advocacy side, because it feels too narrow for them. So finding that Goldilocks framing, where you're framing the issue in such a way to get the right advocates, the right people, as well as the right recipients of the message is key to success. And finally, research, and this goes back again to capacity issues. It's incredibly important, incredibly effective to have data-supported advocacy arguments. And that means someone needs to do the research to gather the data. And that's part of the challenge with advocacy, again, writ large, is that what organization does it? With your direct service organization, you might have some research for your own organization. It's unlikely that you'll be able to conduct research for the community or the field at large. So solving those problems and having organizations such as Afterschool Alliance, I think Erik will talk about this a little more later, and some of that's in the paper, to do the research, to get the data needed to advocate. And then the important part of that I don't want to miss is that it's not just conducting the research, but it's also disseminating it, and so that organizations across the advocacy network have the data they need to then affect policymakers. And again, I know Afterschool Alliance does, as an example, does that well, both in terms of creating the data, but distributing it well and creating the means to use it. And I think I lost my clock here, but I think I can talk to any more on time. So Sofia, I'll just let it go there. Okay.
Thanks. And I wanted to take it, sort of pass it off to Tara and her organization around equity, radical healing through the arts. Tara?
Thank you, Sofia. Gio, do you want to jump in and kick us off?
Yeah, so again, my name is Gio, or Jahiem. I come from Richmond, California with the RYSE Youth Center. And basically I'm here to just kind of talk about our frameworking within youth organizing and advocacy, and where has that gotten us within this organizing and social justice field that we're in. So within RYSE, we have a side of the department which focuses heavily on youth advocacy, leadership, and youth organizing. And I grew up out of that department, as it had a lot of different pipelines, which extended to many different internships and opportunities. And within this, we did a lot of curriculum-based work, running our own programs, event planning, and definitely tying the community to RYSE to better center ourselves within not just the youth, but also with their families, with their schools, and with what actually impacts them throughout their life. So we also did that, and on top of that, we also hosted different things, and we're also asked to come to different places, such as March for Our Lives, National Compadres Network, and that's definitely how we built these opportunities. So one way I had a way of getting into this opportunity was that I was given the position of the California Endowment to be the President's Youth Council member representing Richmond. And the California Endowment is basically a public health foundation centered in California that's nationally known for its public health stability throughout its community. And basically the President's Youth Council's job is to help bridge those connections with the communities, and not just in Richmond, but in San Diego, in Fresno, in Oakland, and all these communities that are overlooked when it comes to public health and social justice. And one way RYSE is really definitely doing that is tying me and the other interns and all of our other partner organizations to center a different theme and idea to better connect our community. And those have happened through different campaigns, such as Richmond Kids First, which is an initiative to lock down a certain amount of money to go to youth. And I know Isaiah will be talking more about that later on in the process of how he did that. And then generally, this kind of all brings us to the community ties of how we're actually inputting, how are we actually getting community input. And that goes back to RYSE Commons, which is basically the expansion of RYSE. And we're right now in the process of building a building behind RYSE, but we don't know what that looks like due to COVID. But definitely it gives us a lot of opportunities to expand our youth age, to expand our mental and physical space, to be able to excel in more opportunities for our young people and for our community members, and then to also get a sense of tie to not just, like I said, the youth members, but also to be able to connect more with their families and what really impacts them on a basis, because we know members also go through a lot at home and at school, and that's generally RYSE's ultimate goal. And to definitely close out, I just want to go ahead and read the RYSE statement, which says, RYSE creates safe spaces grounded in social justice that builds youth power for young people to love, learn, educate, heal, and transform lives and communities. So yeah, thank you. Isaiah?
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Isaiah. So I'll be talking more about RYSE Commons and RYOT and a little bit of Alphabet Group. So to continue on what Gio said about RYSE Commons, yes, so RYSE is expanding to a bigger and newer building, and how that's very beneficial to young artists or just young people in our community. RYSE already creates safe space, so us having a bigger space, it creates that bigger, safer space for young people to really become comfortable being themselves and just being one with another and stuff like that. And also, originally our age range is 13 to 21. So with this bigger space that we're having, we also plan on expanding our age range to be 11 to 25. So it'd be very beneficial to our community and just to everybody in all the age range, especially like the people who are the young adults who are really having a hard time transitioning. So like RYSE Commons is very beneficial to our whole community. And want to talking about a little more on RYSE Commons, or like how can I relate that with activism in our community. In RYSE Commons, like all the youth had like a voice in like when planning RYSE Commons, like this type of space, or like how do they want this room to be and stuff like that. So it really wasn't the youth to like speak about RYSE Commons and like how do they want the new RYSE Center to be. RYSE Commons wouldn't be like the same, if you know what I mean. To talk a little bit more about the RYOT. So Gio kind of explained what RYOT, like his perspective in RYOT, but I was one of the founding members at the RYOT internship. And RYOT stands for Richmond Youth Organizing Team. I think Gio kind of said it. But to explain more about like Richmond Kids First, how he mentioned it earlier, Richmond Kids First was originally a ballot initiative around in I think 2016 that we had made to try to advocate the unrestricted funds that Richmond have that they usually use for like, I want to say police, like always like being at people, like young people's schools just for like sitting there and watching those young people, when all reality that money could be helping out the young people with their resources and stuff like that. So during that time when we had Richmond Kids First, we was trying to advocate the money. We were trying to have it put on the ballot to advocate the money for the young people for their resources and programs like that. And if it wasn't for really RYOT or just RYSE in general, I really wouldn't notice half the negative things that really happened in my community. And when I really started first going to RYSE, it was because like one of the programs I really used to go to besides RYOT was the Alphabet Group. And the Alphabet Group it's an LGBTQ/ally identity group. It's people can go in there, just be themselves. Like, doesn't matter who you are, you can be gay, straight, all that, ally, you can just be yourself and you're comfortable being yourself. And if it really wasn't for them, I think I wouldn't really become more aware of my identity. And to explain more now, like before we was doing like simple Alphabet Group things, now we're currently in the process, especially during this whole pandemic, how we're trying to digitalize everything, especially how video call is a very essential thing right now. So we're in the process of me and a few other young members at the RYSE are in the process of trying to digitalize the Alphabet Group and try to have it accessible for everybody in the Bay Area, and like trying to expand out on as we go, starting with the Bay Area and then the country, then like, you know, the world as we try to see, because since video call is really, and the internet is really just accessible, or kind of accessible for everybody, so we try to make it really like easy for everybody to like hear us and like just be there for one another and just create a safe space on this digital platform. So I'll pass it over to Tara.
So Tara, do you have any few last words just around your organization?
Sure. Thank you, Gio and Isaiah. I think one thing that I also wanted to note is that both Gio and Isaiah are obviously young organizers, but they're also artists. Gio is a spoken word poet and an actor, and Isaiah is a videographer as well as a poet. And so all of that, the art is integrated into all of our organizing work. And if Lisette, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, I think that some of the key pieces that Isaiah and Gio are talking about that is at the core of our work is how are we centering power? How are we centering our relationships within advocacy and policy work? And how are we accountable to our communities? And so we do that by making sure that at our core is youth power and youth vision, and that's through our programs, our policies, our general operations. So we center the lived experiences of young people. We're centering love and care and relationships. I think it was Grace Lee Boggs who said that it's really about critical connections, not critical mass, and that's very much embedded in the work that we do. And then also, how are we centering creativity and healing and risk-taking as an essential part of our liberation, of which the two outcomes are that systems are transformed, meaning that any systems transformation that occurs is informed by young people that are most impacted by those systems, and that also young people are loved and that they are supported in shaping their own identity as well as their own narrative. So I'm happy to talk more also around what RYSE is doing currently to pivot during this time to be more responsive to our community in the Q&A. And thank you.
Thank you. So RYSE is a local example of an organization that Ed refers to in his paper. Erik is going to speak to a national organization. Erik?
Thank you, Sophia. Good afternoon or good morning, folks out on the West Coast. So if we go to the next slide, just a quick intro for those who aren't aware of the Afterschool Alliance. We're a national nonprofit celebrating our 20th year this year, based in Washington, D.C. We work with about 26,000 programs at the local level that do after-school youth development and summer learning programs. We work closely with a network, which I'll get into in a second, of 50 statewide after-school networks, as well as groups at the local level and national partners as well. We've been working with the National Guild and Americans for the Arts for a while now on the creative youth development space. Sorry. Next slide. So there were just a couple things that I was gonna hold up from the paper that Ed did and just sort of resonate a little bit, and then looking forward to the Q&A and discussion in a bit as well. And a lot of these, hopefully from a national perspective, echo what we just heard from RYSE, which is a fantastic program out on the West Coast. So on the support piece, building support through networks and what that looks like. So we work with, again, 50 statewide networks. They're not affiliates. We're not a membership-based model, but these are really organizations that work at the state level to increase support for youth-serving organizations in their local communities, whether that's school-based groups, community groups, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, local government, so youth programs through Parks and Rec departments and others, but really trying to get an inclusive network of programs who are vested, who share common themes around empowering young people and providing opportunities for learning outside of the school day. And learning in a really broad sense. So that would include arts, but it would also include lots of, from our perspective, lots of other subjects and topics and passions as well. The Ambassador Network is something that Ed mentions in the paper that we've had also for about 20 years, where essentially every year in the summer, we reach out to local programs and try to recruit 10 to 15 or so local program directors, managers, coordinators, staff, just folks who are passionate about working with young people, and bring them to DC, give them some training, really to be spokespeople at the local level for local, state, and then also federal policy change. We try to be strategic about that in terms of the areas that are connected back to key federal congressional districts where you have committee chairs, say, for the Appropriations Committee or the Education Committee or other areas where that support really can resonate into positive policy change. Ditto for the state and local level as well. Just 4 years ago now, we started the Youth Ambassador Network as well. So the same sort of model, but really trying to work with young people, again, as part of, as you saw in RYSE's framework, to make sure that since these programs do seek to empower and work with and support young people, that they are, in fact, directing what that looks like, and having more than a voice, but leadership as part of that. Also put down here third-party advocates. This gets to what I think Ed was talking about a little bit in a couple different of the strategies and tactics planks to the paper, but focusing on what the message is, but also on who's delivering the message and who you're delivering it to. So for us, reaching out to key advocates who believe and support the idea of youth development work, but who not necessarily are the programs themselves. Programs themselves are key advocates and are a big part of our network and our ambassadors. But looking at law enforcement, at local mayors, at pediatricians and medical doctors, researchers, small business, other voices that that for a variety of different reasons see the value in youth programming and are able to speak in support of those as well, particularly when we talk about trying to increase the amount of resources and funding for programs. Let's go to the next slide real quick. So the telling the story piece is key. And this sort of gets to the multi-pronged approach, making sure it's not just all about data, but data is important and can really help, particularly with policymakers at the federal level, really all levels, often ask for what your evidence is for the asks that you're making. And so being able to have that is critical, but in a vacuum on its own doesn't quite resonate as much as experience and anecdotes do as well. And so trying to blend those two together, we feel like has been effective in terms of our advocacy approach and approach to policy change. The America After 3 p.m. that Ed mentions in the report and earlier is a data set that we've been doing now, data collection process since 2004. We tried to do it every 5 years or so. We expect another round to be out this fall, hopefully. And essentially what it does is it looks at sort of supply and demand, where young people are in the hours after school during the school day. It also looks at summer as well. So what are young people doing during those hours? Who are they with? If they're in programs, what do those programs look like? What's the funding or cost of programs for young people that are in programs? Student and young person satisfaction with the programs. What's the content? What are they learning or what are they doing during that time? So a wide range of data points. But we find that for local programs and also advocates at the local, state, and federal level, being able to particularly say, look, there's this many, X many students that are in programs, but X many students who, and for after school right now, for the most recent data, 2014, filling in the X's, it's 10 million young people who are in programs every afternoon a month ago, and then but another 19 million whose parents and themselves say would be in a program if there was one available or accessible to them. So that gets to the resource piece for us to try to make the case for more funding. Site visits, is sort of a strategy, and so we found that for policymakers that are pushing back against or question the use of resources for youth programs once they get out to a program, again, whether it's mayor or city council members, school board members, state representatives and governors and state agency folks, but also at the federal level, to actually talk to young people, to talk to parents, to sit in a program, to really experience what it's all about, often helps them become advocates themselves and see the value in funding the programs. And then the equity piece, as Ted mentioned, I think is for national organizations in particular, can be a challenge, but is so important. And one example, coming from this sort of transition to the next slide too, for today and under the pandemic, is this whole piece around when making sure that resources and funding are equitably distributed to the programs and resources that need them the most at the local level, and that's fine to say, and there are formulas in place at the federal level and state level that seek to do that, but often have unintended consequences. So an example to hold up is a lot of federal funding for the youth space works on a reimbursement basis, right? So you apply for a grant, it's competitive. If you get the grant, then you have to put up the money to pay for staff, to pay for the programming, and then file paperwork, and maybe in 30 to 60 days, you're reimbursed from a state agency or federal level, depending on the grant program. Particularly now, that doesn't work for a lot of programs, even without the pandemic, but particularly now it's sort of exacerbated in that programs just don't have the money to be able to work on that reimbursement schedule. So having forward funding, the flexibility of forward funding for programs to be able to still access those funds if they're small and don't necessarily have the cash on hand to be able to front the payment and the work and get reimbursed later. Other things that we're doing now, I think lots of groups are doing, and was alluded to also, is more online meetings. We had a virtual Hill Day on Capitol Hill, which was supposed to be in person about a month ago, March 18th, where we had 350 conference calls with Hill staff, with 450 advocates. I apologize for that noise. That's my cat trying to get in the room. But the virtual Hill Day was quite effective, and it was really allowed youth and program directors and staff, as well as parents and other advocates that were participating, to share their own story and to say, this is what's happening in our communities right now. This is what's going on with school closures. This is what's going on in terms of need for resources for programs right now to avoid laying off staff. All right, I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah. Actually, there is a question, Erik,
yes,
that came through from a participant. Is there a link to share to see the last America After 3 p.m. report?
Yes, I think I can probably put that in the chat box. So I'll work on doing that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then maybe this is a question aimed at you, Erik, but maybe other members of the panel could answer. But is there anyone working on a campaign project to profile multiple governors visiting CYD programs on the same day at the same time?
So I can start that, and happy to defer to other folks as well. We do something as part of our awareness and advocacy work called Lights On After School, which hopefully some folks on the call today have heard of. It's broader again than CYD, but something we'd be interested in highlighting creative youth development as well. And I know there might be other folks on from the Guild and from Americans for the Arts that can speak to this. But at least with Lights On After School, it's been around about 20 years as well. It's every March, or October rather, and is an opportunity for programs at the local level to show what their programs are doing. So it takes different forms in different places. It's locally driven, but many of them invite governors and state representatives out to their programs to see what they look like. Sometimes Lights On After School events are take the form of performances. They can be sort of health fairs, they can be parents' nights, they can be STEM nights. It's a wide variety of what those programs look like. Everything from giant rallies in state capitals on Capitol steps just to an open house in a program school cafeteria for a program. But it's a great idea to focus on efforts like that to increase the visibility amongst policymakers at all levels.
Before I move on, do any of the panel want to respond to anything that's been said so far? If not, I have a question. Erik spoke about, and Ed raises up the issue of data, and how we have data sort of define the direction of our program. Tara, you are a local arts organization. Really, as a representative of K-12, I see your work in sort of filling in the gaps for where K-12 education has not been able to reach youth of color. And so I wonder, what kind of information do you draw on, or do you work with school districts, or how much of your work with school districts really informs your practice?
Yeah, we do. We definitely work with our local school district. We're part of the California Alliance for Arts Education, has launched what they called Arts Now communities, which are nonprofit arts organizations that are working in partnership with school districts. So RYSE is a part of that with West Contra Costa Unified School District, and East Bay Center for the Performing Arts, as well as Richmond Arts Center. And so we're working with the district around their arts plan. We worked with them around building the equity and access to the arts, the resolution that was recently passed to the school board last May, around school climate, different pieces, definitely. So we do partner with the school district, and I think kind of outside of that, and just in research and evaluation as a whole, RYSE does do a lot of that. And what I think is core in that work is that young people are a part of the process of developing the questions. So it's not just like, one side is like the researchers and the other side are the communities that are being asked the questions. There's more of a partnership in place, so we use YPAR and we use like listening campaigns so that all of that work is developed in relationship together.
You bring up a really strong point about youth-led processes. Erik, do you see that strongly in your work? Do you see the youth-led piece across the nation, and how is it? Do you see it in pockets, or how is it expressed?
I think it could be better, a lot better at the national level. Most organizations that we work with, national partner organizations, but not all, do have either new or in some cases older existing structures to try to capture youth voice and really provide leadership, opportunities for youth leadership as part of their policy agendas, their policy platforms. I can think of a handful that do a really good job at that. We're not one of them, we're working on it, but it's a work in progress for us. I think for old organizations, it's been a challenge, but it's so critical in terms of making sure that the work that's being done actually resonates and is effective at the local level for young people who are what these programs are all about.
So Tara, do you want to describe strategies that you use to engage youth to be able to lead? Because often we have, education can sometimes be very, very much top down. And so what strategies do you use to sort of empower and nurture children to feel like they can step up and be leaders?
I would actually ask that question of Gio and Isaiah. Are there any experiences that you would want to share or reflect on where you felt, like you were able to move through those kinds of leadership pathways at RYSE? Or
wait, real quick, can she repeat the question? Because it was kind of breaking up on this end.
We are talking about developing youth leaders, because often we come through a school system and we don't feel empowered to say our truth. And so what we want to hear is the heart the emotional piece.
Okay.
So what inspired you to be the leader that you've become?
I want to say what inspired me is my niece. Like my niece and nephew, they're like my main drive for anything. Like any decision that I make at RYSE, I know is going, like the next generation is going to be there for that decision that I make for RYSE. So I know in my heart that if any choice that I make is the right choice. Because I know at some point in time, because me and my niece, we have this little bond, because like a little fact that me and her are both Aries. So like we just link with each other instantly. Like we're just like inseparable. So she, like her and her brother are like my main drive for like any decision I make. And her, when she gets up to my age, or when the RYSE age range really fully expands to 11 to 25, I know once I make this decision for my community and for the next generation, I know she can carry on. I wouldn't say I want to make a legacy, but I want to say carry on like my work, like I want her to see the work that I've done. I want her to like just carry on what I couldn't finish, or just like, you know? So that's what inspires me. I'll pass it on to Gio.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that inspire me. I think just generally thinking about the future, and understanding that, I think just understanding that, yeah, like how Isaiah said, the work that we're doing is going to be impactful. So I think not necessarily thinking about the youth who are in who are in high school and who are going to definitely be like transitional aged youth and be grown-ups and adults and stuff, but also thinking about like the young people. And I think the actual young people, like the 6 to 12-year-olds, the 0 to 18 children, because generally that will be the people who will be coming after us. And I think going back to the question around strategies and tactics to better empower youth, definitely, I think I just see this in too many spaces where I think a lot of organizations will have the youth adapt to them. And I think for an organization to be really strong and centered in youth power, youth-led and youth-driven and oriented ideas, it definitely has to take risk. And I think RYSE has taken so many risks. We've pivoted in the most hardening situations, but we've always kept youth-led, youth-driven, and youth-oriented spaces a priority. Even going back to like Richmond Kids First, like there were young people in that room. Like Isaiah was one of them who were like actually brainstorming these ideas. And I just so happened to be the youth to come after him to actually go out there and get the idea out to the community. So I think generally it's about also understanding intergenerational organizing, understanding that it's not just the youth who are in this work together, but it's also the elderly, it's the infants, it's the transitional age youth, it's the adults. Because also, even though we're trying to break down the system of ageism, it still exists. And we still have to follow that, sadly, because, you know, legalities and all that. But it's also generally about risk-taking and understanding that, you know, if it's going to be impacting youth, it makes so much sense to have youth in that, at the meetings, on these calls. So, yeah. I don't
And
know
actually, we have a question from one of the participants for specifically for Gio and Isaiah. What strategies should be put in place so that more young people participating in programs like RYSE are in front of lawmakers? What do you think?
I want to say my perspective, because before joining RYSE, I really never, like I mentioned this earlier, I never really noticed all of like the bad thing, like the negative things that would happen in my community. So like, I want to say the strategies to like bring more youth into like this type of like youth organizing work, I want to say just support them. Just let them learn from their mistakes, but like be there for them, and just like, I want to say teach them as they go. Like just the little things that they wouldn't have noticed before, help them really notice it, help them open their eyes to this, like, to this society that they don't really notice as much. Like, oh, okay, they notice like the little things, but help them see the bigger picture in like this whole thing that we're going through right now.
How do you do that? How do you go to your friends and say, okay, you know, I'm part of this thing and I really need for you to participate and it's really important. How do you talk to your friends?
For me, like my friends, it's honestly, it just depends on that person, like your friends. Like for me, my friends support me no matter what. So if I say, can't, like, we're going to the city hall meeting to fight for our rights, my friend's like, all right, bet, what's the time? So like, it's honestly depending on like, if that young person or like your friends are really just to stand up for that, what's right, and just really pushing your friends. If they really like, if they're timid and stuff, like every young person need kind of a small push, not no big push, but just like something to get the ball rolling so they can just be like slowly putting themselves into that mentality to really fight for their rights or speak up for those who can't really speak up. Or it doesn't even have to be like a push. Like it can honestly just be like something that you've seen or just went through. And if they see it in another young person, that is enough to like trigger that drive for them to really just be there for one another and to speak up. So if that answer your question, like, I don't really know any strategies like that, but like that answers the question.
That's good.
Okay.
Gio, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I say on my end, I think it's about decolonizing, understanding that what us as young people, especially in our spaces like our housing, in our households and schools, we learn a lot of toxic things that aren't necessarily true, gender stereotypes, we learn racial stereotypes, all these different things in our households and in our schools, that when we generally come to spaces like RYSE, which are supposed to be safe to be welcoming to all youth, we generally have to sit there and actually go through this practice of decolonizing and understanding why that's wrong, and understanding for so many different times in so many different households, we have been learning these things to hate a specific type of group, whether that's homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Blackness, whatever it is, but generally understanding that we have to unlearn that. And also it's about key patience, understanding that trauma within youth is so overlooked. And I think is generally one of the biggest problems that youth are facing. And as we come up closer in this type of society, we see youth coming in more closer with civic engagement in politics and getting more active in those topics. And I think some of the adults in a situation don't necessarily know how to handle it, or don't necessarily know what to do. So I think generally it's a side of definitely the youth understanding why that was wrong, or understanding such as understanding what safe space means and all that type of stuff, but then also understanding that the adults have the role to play in guiding the youth to understand that specific topic. And then also I think it's just like other things like incentives, like definitely paying our youth, whether giving transportation, food, because we also have to understand that youth are going out their way to take time off of homework, jobs, schools, whatever it looks like, to come to RYSE and to come to these different organizations and to go to city council meetings and all that. So definitely incentives, definitely food and transportation are a key priority, because if you expect the youth to be across town and they have no type of way to get over there, like Lyft cards, bus passes, wherever it looks like, generally RYSE does support me and Isaiah with that. Me and Isaiah, both our interns and our members. So yeah, I think generally those are just things that came to mind.
Those are excellent points.
Real quick, one more thing to mention real quick, because
Sure.
Jill just like reminded me another strategy to really get youth into this type of work, incentives. Like also with transportation and food, but incentive is, for most kids, it helps distill that responsibility with them at a young age. Because for RYSE, when I started my internship there at RYSE, I want to say I started at 14, and that's when I started like getting my own check, and that's like when it starts like instilling a responsibility for young people to like have this mentality of like saving up money and like all adulting like responsibilities before they really become a full adult. So incentives is like a real major play as well.
Nice. I completely agree. Ed actually has a question. So we're in the last 9 minutes of our webinar, and Ed had a question for all the panelists. When the Hewlett Foundation evaluated their arts ed advocacy efforts, they found that there's a desire for arts ed by policymakers, but it doesn't always survive resource scarcity. That observation is amplified now in the age of COVID-19, needs and increased fundraising scarcity, how do you convince policymakers of the need for creative youth development in an environment of other needs? I open the floor.
I'm happy to take a crack at that, and then love to for other folks to jump in as well. I think it's a challenge right now, for sure. The key, is again, is telling the story and collecting data. So data, everything about the data has changed, obviously, in the past month, and trying to capture what the state of programs are right now, including CYD programs, what that's looking like in terms of staffing, in terms of funding, trying to capture that as quickly as possible, even just quick and dirty surveys of programs, and being able to tell the story with the data, but then also the experiences of programs and young people impacted as well, I think is key right now. I mean, I think the one, while it's a challenge, the one thing that we have found, there's a lot of people who are wanting to listen and who want to know hear from local programs and young people at the local level right now. They want to hear what their experiences are, what the challenges look like at the local level, the staff, policymakers, at least at the federal level, and I would think at the state level as well right now. They're very hungry for information from real experiences from young people and from programs that are working through this. But I think it will be a challenge. There's the number of sort of competing priorities right now. It's always been a lot, but it's obviously skyrocketed.
So Tara, do you see, or can you anticipate the way you'll need to pivot in this unprecedented time?
Sure, and I think that we are. I think that we're doing that. RYSE is doing that pretty immediately. I think part of the challenge in answering the question is that, like historically oppressed, marginalized groups are frequently asked to be put in the position where they have to convince somebody else of why they are worthy of the resources, of the shared power, just like the basic needs and desires to live. And so I think part of it is around the framing of the question too. Should we be trying to convince funders, or should we be telling funders that they need to support our work that's in connection to supporting and uplifting our communities? I think RYSE is very fortunate in that we do work with funders that are values aligned, and so we've been able to convene some of them to develop a Richmond Rapid Response Fund that right now I think is at around $25,000, where RYSE will become the West County sort of fund distribution site to give money to families, knowing that the stimulus checks are not going to make that much of an impact when you're calculating rent and food and all sorts of other things. As well as like for a lot of folks in our community that are undocumented that won't see that money to begin with. And so that's part of the work that we're doing to pivot. We're also convening, we're holding these weekly convening sessions around providers and the county nonprofit organizations in our area to talk about what we're doing around like, the school district and housing and reentry, and what funders are doing to make emergency funds available as quickly as possible. Also with the understanding that we are pivoting our work right now to respond to what the immediate needs are. And in all of our work, arts integration is key. So creative youth development is not a separate section from our mental health programming. All of it is integrated. And so the funds that are going to support that are also going to support creative youth development too.
So we're in the last 4 minutes. Lisette, do we have time for one more question or?
Maybe one more quick question.
None of them are quick.
um,
I mean,
we can always save these questions. Maybe maybe we can also send it out to those who were identified within the question, and then just make it a resource and send out these questions.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Okay.
So I'll take a screenshot.
Okay, that sounds great. I just want to express my gratitude and thanks for everybody showing up on the panel. Thank you for the youth to keep it real. And I know that participants really appreciated your participation in the discussion. I think we're about 3 minutes out. Do we have time for one more? Here's one, really quick. Do you see changes in grant selection criteria of foundations and funders based on the current crisis? And who can speak to this? Ed?
Sure, I can speak briefly. There's a great guy on Twitter to follow, Vuli, and he's been starting his hashtag, 2 hashtags, I'm probably gonna get them wrong, but hashtag awesome funder stories and, excuse my language, crappy funder stories. And it's, if you find the correct hashtag and look at those, you can see in real time how funders are changing criteria in both directions. Some are doing really great things, meaning, you know, the way I'm and he's defining great things are making applications easy right now, making applications quick, giving general operating support money instead of restricted funds. Those are all things and giving it and giving it to what you as an organization need right now, not necessarily things that specifically COVID related things that they have sophisticated, great funders understand that there are needs that your organization have that Tara just talked about, and so that's the great things that are happening. There's also some changes in the short term that people are doing, funders are doing what I think are, and what he thinks are the wrong things in terms of, you know, requiring multiple board signatures from applications to be mailed in right now, from rescinding some funding that it's not, that for canceled projects to give to COVID-related things, a lot of work for small grants, things like that. So hopefully, you know, in any time, we're still at early stages in this crisis, and I think that people are responding and partners are responding in different ways, and hopefully this will sort out towards the correct the positive changes for the field overall, and I'm confident they will. But short-term things are changing quickly, and hopefully it will land in a way that's sophisticated for the funders, a sophisticated funder understanding that really helps organizations writ large.
Great, and that is a great tone to end on. I'm going to pass it back to you, Lisette. I would just want to thank the panelists yet again, for their participation in this rich conversation around creative youth development, particularly in the time of COVID-19 pandemic, and for us to be responsive to our current conditions and just be able to pivot where we need to. So, Lisette?
Thanks, Sophia, and thank you again to all of our panelists. And I've captured these last minute questions that are coming in. I'll capture them and send them to our panelists, and I can then follow up with everyone who's been on this call with those answers. And we have been recording this session. We're going to send out a recording as well as a survey because grants. So yeah, look out for those. Thank you everyone for being here. I know time is, and Zoom also, it's a lot. So thank you again, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Thank
Isaiah.
you, guys. Thank
Bye,
you.
Gio.
Bye-bye.
And Tara, Sophia.
Thank you.